This week on your Old School RuneScape update, 2023 comes to a close with the recap of the year that was. We discuss our journey, the year's big updates, the impact of community, expectations for upcoming content, and what 2024 looks like for us and the show. This is the Old School RuneScape update, episode 8, recorded Saturday, December 23rd, 2023. Mod Community. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Old School RuneScape update. Sirion and myself are here as we are each and every week. Welcome back.
Hi. Was that me or the listeners you were welcoming back? I was very confused there.
Both. Both. I welcome Tanis back every week on the main show, but I mean, it can also, of course, go to the listeners too, depending on whichever way you want to slice it. And of course, Merry Christmas to everybody, as this episode is coming out late on the 23rd, early on the 24th, Christmas Eve, and we're gonna do something a little bit different for this week here at the Old School RuneScape update. We're going to do a year in review podcast of the year that has been for Old School RuneScape and us on Old School as well. This was actually your idea.
Yes, I suppose.
It was.
Can't take full credit of it. We do it for RS3, so.
Yeah, that's true. And you know, I had just imagined myself sitting back talking about leagues again this week, but we have plans for the podcast and Old School RS update going into January. We'll tell you about those a little bit later in the show. But if you want to follow along for this episode, full show notes can be found at update.show/OS. We also have a friends chat in-game, which is BitsBytes, and our community Discord is update.show/Discord. And, of course, you can find me in-game at Shane12088, and Sirion can be found at Sirion, Cireon. I spelled that right. It's always touch and go spelling things live like that for me.
All right.
But in any case, we're going to talk a bit about how we got started with Old School, and then some of the Old School content update pieces of the year, and what kind of trends those highlight for Old School RuneScape as a game. So let's just get started with how we came to Old School RuneScape. I'll let you begin on this because I'm trying to remember whether this was your idea or my idea to do what we did.
I don't know whose idea it was. That's a really, really good question. I'm trying to remember why I went into Old School, because I know I was playing it before we started our whole questing adventure. I'm not sure what got me into playing it to begin with.
Was it that RuneFest 18 visit?
No. Honestly, I am not sure. This has been over a year ago. I'm not sure, but I was playing it, and we used to have Croesus Sundays, or Sus Sundays.
Wonderful name.
Wonderful name on RS3, which we really enjoyed. It was sort of our gaming night together as well. And when interest in that waned, we were like, you know what? Let's go and get a quest cape on Old School.
Which, you know, at the time sounded like an easy thing to do, and I didn't know how long it was going to take. And
I did not think it was going to be easy.
Okay. And the reason I say that is because obviously, you know, fewer quests than RS3, and the vast majority of them we will have done before having played RuneScape myself, at least when these quests were new in this version of the game. So it's like, yeah, okay, we can do that. And I remember I made my Old School RuneScape account to play the Christmas event last December. And then after that, I messaged you and I said, hey, we're doing this in January. We're starting with the quests and the quest cape. And
Yeah, because I think the idea had come up a few times already, many months before that. I think I might have started playing during Halloween or something like that,
okay,
because I think I did the Halloween
right.
event.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I know for a bit you had a level advantage and a quest advantage on me, and we did end up equalizing our quests eventually, and I am on record of hating the cat quest, Gertrude's cat and
Yes.
whatnot. I delayed and delayed and delayed that one until it was no longer possible because there is the evil Dave quest and the recipe for disaster subquest and whatnot that do need a cat for that. So it was time for me to do
You
that. But
did the evil Dave quest with a kitten, you madman.
I mean I did it with a kitten the first time I did recipe for disaster and it was fine. And granted, I was probably clawing my eyes out with that as I was this time, but thankfully this time about halfway through that venture, my kitten grew up into a cat and it became a lot easier. But
Yeah.
and see that's the thing. This podcast and our old school adventure started with quests. And it's interesting because I feel like at many times this year we both also needed an escape from RS3 for one reason or another, just, as a different scenery change, right? And I
Yeah.
feel like this was a good year to do that on the old school side.
Yeah, I think for me, even back like a year ago, RS3 started becoming a little bit still. And old school was just that fresh new environment to try something completely new while also being familiar. Uh, and
Yeah.
falling under the same membership.
Yeah, that's right. And there have been times I wished I would have done the old school adventure on my skill pair name so that I could, be on RS3 at the same time doing something else because you can't
Yeah.
you can't run the same accounts at the same time, but it's fine. Um, figured out ways around that, and th-
For me, like one of the big reasons that I really wanted to get into it as well, like I think 2022 was a good year for like content. Or people are gonna tell me I'm so wrong in the comments. Please do if I'm wrong, by the way. Good for the engagement. But I think like 2022, there was like Monkey Madness 2, Dragon Slayer 2. I was like, darn, I would love to actually get me some of that. So those were
yeah,
all reasons. Like it's all high level content. We aren't even close yet. Um, but working towards that and experiencing that is definitely something I am still looking forward to.
yeah, and on that same thing, one thing that I've picked up along the way is that we, and maybe I'm speaking for both of us here, but definitely for me, playing the different combat style is since 2012 on RS3 and coming back to the old school combat system was something that was actually refreshing in a way once I reacquainted myself with it because it's simple, yes, but it has its own intrinsicies to it as well that are able to
Hmm.
actually make for engaging gameplay in the way that it's set up. And I feel like that's in many ways the one of the hidden gems of old school RuneScape. Not necessarily the combat system in itself, but just how there's things in the game that are that look simple on the surface, surprisingly simple, but can wind up being its own unique facet of the game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no. What old school really shows to me is how creative they have become in utilizing the mechanics that they do have available and the
Yeah,
limited graphics they do
yeah,
have available
yeah,
in ways that RS3 cannot or does not. They could, but they don't. Like in a sense, and this is nothing against RS3 in any way, but I feel RS3 has started to rely a little bit much on its spectacle, right? It is really about the storytelling, the environments, the music, in some cases the voice acting. that is really what most of the content relies on, and it's less mechanics heavy in a sense.
Sure.
Whereas old school, you don't really. I mean, Torrent looks great, especially the Kivus Woodlands. Isle of Souls looks great. Like, there's pieces of content that look great.
Right, and that's actually what I wanted to say. I wanted to bring up those two areas in particular to say that, you know, in general, you think that old school RuneScape is this game with low polygon environmental assets that's, you know, straight out of 2007, 2008. What is it doing in 2023, 24? Well, you see that based on that, the old school RuneScape team has come up with an art direction and a graphical style that fits with old school, but also you really don't bat an eye at in 2023-24 because it's just as stylized as any other game out there, like Fortnite, for example.
I would love for them to bring this style back to existing places in the world. Like, I think this looks better than the sort of HD-ish textures that you see on like some places. Like the almost flat colors, almost cell shading, works really well with this.
That's exactly the way I described it with that.
Yeah.
And, you know, part of me feels like the Isle of Souls and Corrin was kind of as a way to see how far they could push the envelope, and if players would be willing to accept that in terms of, you know, reworking main areas. I don't know if they're going to go that direction or if there's the budget to do that sort of thing, but that is definitely something that I picked up on as well with that. And go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if you have more points on the graphics, but
no, not really.
One thing that I sort of extrapolated from this, and this is something that has somewhat surprised me, but I don't think it should have surprised me. Like, again, I'm going to contrast old school here with RS3, and I think RS3 is focused a lot on almost a singular way to play. I know this is a controversial take, but, you know, there's one definition there of completionism. And old school, I find, has less of that. And I think this might be the biggest attraction that old school has on a lot of people, is that I feel that old school lends itself much more for playing it in so many different ways. I think it relies much more on your own goal setting. It relies much more on your own problem-solving skills, on how do you get to a certain place. You see this in all the YouTube series where people put up made up restrictions to how they play. And Leagues, I think, is another great example of this, right? Like, it is taking this existing game, pasting a slightly different rule set on top of it, and all of a sudden you have a very different experience that still has all the familiarity of the game.
Yeah.
And I think this just speaks to the fact that what old school does is it doesn't try to evolve the game necessarily. I mean, yes, it refines it, it improves it, and expands it, but
it doesn't try and be new for the sake of being new.
Exactly. It doesn't. It just puts new permutations of things there. And if you look at the skilling bosses, I think the skilling bosses are a great example of this. There's nothing fundamentally complex or complicated about it. The environments are not particularly impressive. Like, Winter Toad is literally a particle effect in a big wide room.
Yeah. And
still look
and
at
it's
what
simple
they managed
enough
to make with
that on the mass worlds for it, you only get 2 out of the 4 braziers actually being used. People are just maximizing in the 2 closest corners, and you're still able to kill the thing and get, you know, all the benefits you would otherwise to it, and, you know, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And
so that's what surprised me, and that's what delighted me, I think, is the right word.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. I think my biggest surprise is of course what kind of similar to what you're talking about, except on the skilling side, is that the vast majority of the old school RuneScape skills out there actually have had a number of wonderful skilling updates to them, and we're going to talk about some of those.
No tool belt, though.
Yeah, and I mean, you remember how many, and I feel it's important to say that I complain to you almost on a daily basis about the tool belt.
Yes.
Prior to leagues.
Yes.
So that's why you mentioned that. And the skill updates do the exact same things that you said. They don't try and do new things for the sake of being new. They just iterate what was there, putting a different spin on it. And until the old school community feels as though that's not a popular thing to do, I think that's the way the game goes, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's all these little gems, all these unique little things that have popped up under the covers that you don't see from the surface of just looking at the game, I think, that have enabled us to, in effect, rediscover RuneScape from the old school perspective. And the biggest question that I got when I mentioned that this old school RuneScape podcast was happening was that, are you doing this because of some outrage on RS3? And the answer was no, this was planned for when leagues began and was planned probably since, March of this year to be doing this show on that. So it's nothing to do with that. It's to do with the actual game elements that have arrived, and just the fact that so many of them have been worthwhile to talk about. And you know this, and the listeners probably know this by this point as well, is that some of the fun that I have is just diving into some of the dev blogs that get posted on the old school RuneScape website.
Oh God, the communication is a league of its own, no pun intended.
God.
It's really close to what I consider perfect community management. It's not quite up there, but they do a really good job at it.
And I think again that comes from the core ethos of the game. But in any case,
I think we need to get real down.
We do. I was just going to say that. Talk about some of this year's updates.
No. There's also been some surprises that were less positive on my side.
Okay.
I think they need to be mentioned, and I think you might agree with me here, but stop me if you don't. For me, a lot of the quests I did for the first,
right,
only ones. I've never been much into alts. I have a main on RS3, and that's it. Let's be honest. And most of the quests I did there, at least the old quests, I did with a guide in Dutch, because English wasn't my native language, still isn't actually. So this was the first time I experienced a lot of the quests, and I feel I have been looking at them with too much of rose-tinted glasses, because boy, is there a lot of jank.
Well, let's talk. I know we said we were going to talk about what we've been doing this week, but we just did the Throne of Miscellanea quest.
Yes.
Horrible quest. Wonderful reward. Horrible quest.
Yeah, there's really not much to it. It feels so arbitrary and weird. And it's not the only one that had that problem, right? We've done so much running around, and we're like, how is this so bad? To the point where we needed palette cleansers at the end of it just to get rid of how bad these quests are.
And see, I remember, I wasn't necessarily doing the show at the time that I did some of these quests back in the day. But I remember telling people RuneScape isn't your fetch your game that has fetch quests when these quests were coming out.
Yeah, no, exactly.
But now these quests are fetch quests.
Yeah, they very much feel that way. And another thing that's really stood out to me is for most of the quests, you feel like you have much more of an emotional attachment to them compared to me. And I think it's because you did them, quote unquote, more honestly without too much of a guide.
Yeah.
Because you didn't want to do Feminic Trials for the longest time, because you're like, oh, there's this combat encounter, it's so hard, I'm going to struggle so much. We didn't. You just flick on your prayer and you hit it a few times.
Right. And that's maybe going back to the bad memories of things, is that 2005 me didn't know how to do that, just it took me 7, 8, or 8 attempts to eventually get a fire cape, whereas I did that on leagues, no problem, on go number 1 last night.
Yeah. No, exactly. So, and what that has led me to believe, and maybe there's a psychologist out there that's shaking their head and like, well done, you figured out like a basic truth. But I think what happens with especially quests is that we forget the details in the longer term, and we remember more the emotions and the feelings we had at the time. In my case, there weren't a lot because I was following a guide, so all the quests were easy, and the story didn't matter much. Whereas you seem to, really like or dislike certain quests based on how much you struggled in the past with it.
That's true. That's true.
So to me, that was an interesting finding. So far though, all of the modern quests we've played, they've been great. So
Yeah.
I'm still looking forward to all the quests that are to come. I think we're getting to the point where we're getting to most of the jank, I think.
Yeah. Garden of Death.
One small favor is still in there.
Garden of Death. You told me not to mention this again.
No.
Garden of Death.
Did. Yeah.
Favorite old school quest.
Yeah.
Favorite old school quest. The reason for it is it's a puzzle. There's no dialogue in it. You just interact with the environment.
I did it on leagues with Quest Helper and was done in 5 minutes.
Exactly. Same.
I feel a little bit dirty about it.
No, that's fine for leagues. And see, that's the thing. It's these sorts of hidden gems like this that have made old school what it is.
Yeah.
And if things like Garden of Death, the Corrin series, and all the new quests that we've done since then are the watermark of the way old school is going to carry out its quest, yes, absolutely. And I realize you were talking about, some of the annoying things in this segment. So forgive me for making it positive again. But is there anything else left annoying that you want to?
No, I think it needs to be said. I think we need to accept that nostalgia is a big thing, and I think you need to accept that old school has a lot more jank, and that's something you need to deal with. That being said, I mean, I was playing Pokemon Fire Red earlier today.
And you've never played
playing a Pokemon. It was the first time playing a Pokemon game, but there were so many people in the chat like, "Oh yeah, so sorry. Like modern games fix this problem, right?" But there's also a certain charm to it.
Sure.
And it's the same. Like I play some of the retro Zelda games. I know how much jank there is in that, and I know the design wasn't as good back in the day. But it also becomes part of the charm.
Yeah, that's fair. Speaking of jank, I'm wanting to see what happens when we do Monkey Madness.
Please. That's the one I have bad memories about, I think.
Oh, me too. Should this be? Hang on. Let me see. What do we got for requirements here? We have all the requirements to do Monkey Madness.
We've had all the requirements.
First quest of 2024?
No, we've had all the requirements for like 6 months.
I think we should.
No, we have other plans.
Okay. Fair enough. Right, we do. All right. Let's talk about some of the content that came out this year, maybe?
Let's do it.
Because I feel like we've been talking about what we've experienced, but also, a year in review has to talk about what Jagex brought out. And, one of the things that was on this list that, we're not PvP players, but there was a revamp, a bounty hunter that came out this year. And I found this incredibly interesting watching this because at the time I wasn't in old school with both feet in.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really enjoyed watching about this was just seeing how the fact that we have this vibrant PvP community, people in the PvP community can correct me if I'm wrong, if vibrant is not the word, but there is a PvP community in old school RuneScape.
I think the right adjective here you're looking for is bloodthirsty. Sure.
A community that was working with this content and, based on what I can tell, this bounty hunter rework seemed to have come out okay across the end of it, and some pretty interesting reward space too for this, looking at the reward table on here. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how much of the old school RuneScape community PvPs. I don't have those numbers on hand right now, But I think the interesting thing about this is that this is PvP content in a game that has what is effectively amounting to point-and-click combat. And if you go on YouTube or you look on Twitch, you can find people making PvP videos or streaming PvP Bounty Hunter. And I think that speaks for the content itself.
Yeah, like this was a big deal when it came out, and sorry, I didn't look at it much. I followed all the news posts though, and I'm like, I'm very surprised that it got as much attention as it did. But I'm very happy that this is still a possibility and a thing. And I guess the combat system just allows for PvP a little bit more. Like I've been doing Star Wars for Leagues a little bit, and honestly, it works, and I think it works better than RSV.
Yeah, because and the issue with that is that when that thing called EOC happened, the combat system was rebalanced for monsters only, and you had way too much power to take down a player. Whereas the old school side is a lot more even in that, and that's why you're able to do that. And, you know, maybe one day I'll try PvP, because the last time I would have PvP'd back in this game was, 2006, right?
Oh boy, people in the wilderness, watch out! Shade the Menace is coming.
No, and people don't realize this, but in another MMO, Star Trek Online, once upon a time, I ran and was involved with one of the largest PvP guilds there, and it dominated quite a chunk of my time. So PvP is in the games is something that I definitely do find interesting, and who knows, maybe old school might be a way to lean into that. Though, knowing how the system works, I might need to make a rebalanced character for that. So maybe not. See, there's the wheels turning. But in any case, Bounty Hunter was a thing, and overall, this thing went off quite well. And again, just like you were talking about in our previous spot there, the community discussion and the community back and forth involved in this from the community management team, I think, was exactly where it needed to be.
Yeah.
So that's probably why there was such a great reaction to this, in addition to scratching an itch that the PvP community had.
And to me, what this showed is the nice balance between updates that we get throughout the year, right? Like there's room for most of the disciplines across what a old school player might want to do. Yeah. Our next update that we want to talk about that came out this year that we haven't done yet, so we're not going to spoil anything on the podcast. This is going to be a very high-level overview of it, is Secrets of the North. And this, coming over to old school, was one of the pieces of content that I was looking forward to doing, because this came out at the moment we started questing, basically. I know. It was the first update of the year.
And the reason for that is because this continues the Majorat storyline, which is a very interesting thing to watch, because for the longest time, when old school first came out, I feel like there was a reluctance of the old school RuneScape team to do new quests, because I don't think they got their first new quest until something like 2016. I'd have to go back and look at the list. I think it was 2016, which means that the lore of the game was pretty much in a time capsule until then, stuck in that 2007 era of where we are. And keep in mind, the thing and the direction that RS3 took at the time, or RuneScape 2 as it was back in 2008, was they went heavily down the Majorat bandwagon, right? Well, Guthrie sleeps.
No, I mean, that there's this whole quest line that we don't even have in old school, which is like Defender of the Rock and the Curse of Araf. I don't know. Yeah,
well, Guthrie sleeps. Ritual of the Majorat, so on and so forth, which of course led to the big Sixth Age thing. And the thing that made me most interested when I saw people talking about Secrets of the North was seeing how is this Majorat line going to advance and what's going to be the main story aspects of this without that big idea that the gods are going to awaken at some point down the path. Because, let's be real here. That path was set when While Gothic Sleeps came out. And we don't have that.
In a sense, yeah.
Yeah, we don't have that yet in Old School. We talked about how that was an option on the survey, the big survey, last week. So the question for me was, how is this Majorat storyline going to shake out? And, of course, with that, this year we got Secrets of the North. And Desert Treasure 2, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But this is a quest that I definitely want to play. And, just looking at the requirements yet, we're still not quite there yet for this, are we? Well, you might be, but I'm not.
I mean, I can
69
check.
agility, 64 thieving, 56 hunter.
No. And it requires making friends with my arm, which is another big one. And Swan Song. This is some high level shit.
And they're not even calling this one Grandmaster.
No, I mean, I look forward to it as well. I heard good things about it when it came out.
Oh, yeah.
So.
And it goes without saying, and
it's a requirement for Desert Treasure 2. So.
Yeah.
I think you can't really see those two separate from each other.
No.
This was very much the year of Desert Treasure 2. I feel.
No, that's a fair assessment.
Desert Treasure 2, the thing that I really kind of like about it, and again, this might also be a hot take. I'm full of hot takes today. Is that it's actually difficult. Like, the bosses in Desert Treasure 2 are actually genuine hard, from what I've seen.
Yeah, that's true. And I feel like we could talk about Desert Treasure 2 and Secrets of the North kind of in the same vein as their quests we haven't done. They came out in succession of each other this year, obviously part of that whole Majorat plan. And like you said, Desert Treasure 2, Secrets of the North, heard good things about both of them. And it's on that same vein of, being an old school RuneScape quest, as we talked about most of the other old school RuneScape quests being very good. So I want to play these, and I think 2024 will be our Questcape year, unless anything goes horribly wrong based on where we're at, north of 50% done. Yes?
Yeah, I hope so. There's a few. The grinds are gonna start getting pretty real, I think. We're getting out of the mid levels.
Yeah,
we need
that's
to start.
True. That's true.
Bumping up our levels, but no, these quests really look fun and interesting, and I'm very curious to see what they've done with it. Yeah.
All right. And I think if I'll just say one more thing on these, it's that we both have our roots on the questing side. In particular, we are members of Clan Quest. And these quests have always been something that have driven my gameplay. I don't know if that was true with you back in the day.
Yeah,
okay.
For sure.
Okay.
For sure.
So, your level training was driven by what quest you wanted to do next, and you would plan your playing around the quest. Got it. Okay, good. So that's the way we've been playing old school RuneScape, and it works. It works.
Yeah. I mean, the Desert Treasure 2, one of the things that I think is worth pointing out, and that I'm very interested to see how this goes forward, is the whole discussion around the ruinous powers.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know if they made the right decision not putting it in. I think it makes sense because it was holding back the rest of the content.
I mean, we got to dabble. Some people get to dabble with them in leagues now.
I mean, I looked at them in leagues and I was like, they're not actually that interesting.
No, they're not.
I think they made the right call in not shipping them the way they are. But it's also a little bit disappointing that, Desert Treasure was such a huge deal with Ancient Magics. This would have been a great opportunity to get Ancient Prayer in there, and we didn't. Maybe we still will in the future. I hope we do.
I wonder if it's the... And see, I remember watching this Ruinous Powers discussion. I wonder if the RS3 Ancient Curses had any impact on how people were voting for this.
I think so. People didn't want it to be...
Because there's
like,
no soul split on this list, right?
No, but people didn't want it to be... Like, there's very little reason why in RS3 you wouldn't use Ancient Prayers. Right. And they didn't want it to be that here. They wanted it to be an actual choice.
Okay, game design moment here. You tell me if I'm wrong or right about this. If something is so powerful in a video game that it absolutely must be a must slot, you have gone wrong. There should always be a choice about whether or not you need to use something.
There should not necessarily a choice, but a trade-off is what you want, right? Like, a rune hatchet is better than an adamant hatchet. Like,
that's obvious.
Period. But it's obvious because you need to work harder for it to get it. So that's fine. That way you can overshadow other pieces of content. But and that is why ancient prayers in RS3 are not necessarily broken, right? You need to work to unlock them. Here they were like, we don't want to go that way. We kind of want it to be... We don't want to obsolete the existing prayers.
Yeah, they want it more to be a choice.
Given how hard Desert Treasure 2 is, I don't know if it was necessary, but I respect that decision. But you're putting yourself in a corner then, because now you need to find ways... Because prayers are a pretty complete thing, right? They cover all combat styles. How do you put things in a different prayer book that are sort of the same but also different and have trade-offs? It's
that's an interesting question, and I think the way to know about Ruinous Powers, if they would have been worthwhile, was there ever a world where you would have considered going Ruinous Powers as one of your League relics?
I didn't. Mostly because the other leagues, like relics, were more powerful.
Right, and for clarity, the other choices were Equilibrium, which boosted the amount of XP that you would gain by a little bit. Nobody. The Farmer's Fortune, and Ruinous Powers was that choice at tier 6.
I mean, I went for the skilling one because I'm more interested in the skilling aspects than the PVM aspects.
Right.
So, yeah. I mean, it's going to be interesting, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I wonder how much of the discussion from Ruinous Powers, along with the discussion from Forestry and Shooting Stars, all things we're going to talk about, is going to lead in the whole Project Rebalance discussion. And I think that would be the place where we might start seeing things like this surface again, or at least after that.
Yeah, and I think if they put out a piece of content, or at least pull a piece of content, right, and then it goes down in flames, they're going to wonder, why did that happen? And then, you put that on the back burner, maybe you iterate on it, maybe you change a few things for the next time, and then you get something else entirely different resulting in it, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense, what I just said.
I don't know if it's fair to say that Ruinous Powers crashed and burnt. I don't think...
Maybe there just wasn't a clear consensus about it, if I remember how that kind of shook out.
Yeah, exactly. But, I felt that was an interesting discussion, but... And this is something I really appreciate about the devs. The devs made the hard choice to cut that content. Is it the right choice? You can argue about it, but they did make that call. And they dared to still release the rest of the content without. And it goes to show how much of a community impact, how much of an impact the community has.
Especially with, and see, that's the thing. I was going to say that those are, sometimes hard decisions to make like that. But when you have the community buy-in, it makes it so that you're making that decision together with the community.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than, just, and this is maybe another, just to kind of go back for a second, this is maybe one of my biggest old school misconceptions that was broken this year is that initially I thought that the game was just entirely driven by the community, almost in a mob-like sense. But it's very much the case of the community and the devs working together on that. You see that in what we were just discussing. But I'm going to save our big update of the year, my favorite update of the year, for the last one in this section. But I want to talk about the Scar Essence Mine first before we get there, because that was a reward that came from Desert Treasure 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are you looking forward to playing this piece of content when we get there? Because I totally
am. Not necessarily.
No,
like,
okay.
If I remember correctly, the Scar Essence thing was mostly... It's not even that good if you're not an Iron Man, right? Like, this is a piece of Iron Man content.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
And it's actually really expensive to do this content. If you don't have a good reason to do it, you shouldn't, right? Like, that's the way it was balanced. And oh my goodness, reading all of the news posts about this, I got so excited because I could see all the game design movements in there and it all clicked together. And I think it's a great solution, right? It solves the problem for Iron Man.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really affect anything else, because really they shouldn't be looking at the content because it's so bad for them. If they have access to.
And see, that's the thing. Like, I'm not necessarily jumping up and down about it because it's going to be the best in slot XP per hour for something, or it's going to, provide me a chance to do something that I'd never done before. It's just that it's a unique piece, a uniquely designed piece of content that I can't play anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And
sure.
and that's what I mean when, I say I want to play it at the end. And, I'll probably spend a few hours there and then move on because I'm not an Iron Man character. But I think even the processes within the Scar Essence Mine are something to behold, because I remember when they announced this on one of the dev blogs here, they included inside the blog post the gameplay loop included in a flowchart with this. And just being able to visualize the update like that and see it presented in that way really spoke to me. And, people might say, okay, you just go play the content and, if you have fun with it, it's good. If you don't have fun with it, it's bad. But for me, this little cherry on top of showing exactly how they envisioned the processes and flows within it going, much like you, sold me that, okay, this is a well-designed piece of content. It might not necessarily be 100% for me since I'm not an Iron Man perspective, but boy, did they put their thought into this.
And this is another thing needs to be said about the collaborative design thing, right? First of all, there's two aspects to game design, right? Like, being able to design a game is all good and well and is impressive and is a good skill to have on its own, especially in the games industry. But being able to then communicate that game design in a concise but clear way to the community that isn't necessarily an expert in game design is really impressive, right? That's a rarer skill than being able to design a game, period.
Yeah.
So the fact that they were already achieving that makes me super happy. But that in itself is hugely important to gaining that trust of the community. Because I think to be in full collaboration with your community, you need to have a full two-way communication transparency.
Yeah.
And if your developers are not able to go into the details as to why certain things are the way they are, and why certain decisions were made, you can never really achieve that. And I think, again, I see this going wrong on the RS3 side time and time again, right? Like, there is great discussions on their Discord in the game design channel where people actually try to understand the decisions and there's room for that expansion. But outside of it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
In old school, it's news posts.
That's right.
About this.
That's right. And for people who listen to both this show and the RS3 show, you'll know one of the things we always complain about on the RS3 show is that most of the, big discussions around content and things that are coming into game that might not necessarily be, you know, news post worthy happen in a Reddit thread or a Discord.
Yeah.
Whereas here we have this happening in the news post.
And I think, and this comes back, this is a theme across all of old school. I think the old school team trusts their players more to behave like adults, to be smart and intelligent. And this is not to the detriment of the RS3 team, right? Like, this is just a difference in communication style.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say the old school treats the other people in the community as equals, but it's getting there, right? Like, if you look
There's
at the
a level
fact
of respect.
that they use Gentle Tractor's design for current, the fact that the rooftop courses were designed by a Red Panda, right? Like, all of these player-designed content which is so tightly integrated, and the fact that the content that appears on the old school channel is made by content creators, right? Like, people, it feels much more like the community is as a whole an employee of the old school team.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. I never considered that before.
And the game does the same, right? Like, the game doesn't tell you what completionist is. It gives you the freedom to make your own decisions.
And you're not necessarily, you know, necessarily left with having, you know, 3 or 4 completionist style capes to go for as your end game in old school.
Exactly. And this is what attracts me so much more about old school in this particular moment.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And, you know, you're right to draw this common link between all these pieces of content. You know, obviously the biggest one, like you mentioned, Scar Essence Mine leaned into that. Ruinous Powers leaned into that. And we're seeing that in pretty much all of the content that we're talking about this week, and, you know, maybe the content that we like. We might just be biased on that. If you guys disagree with us, let us know. But I feel like the biggest piece of content that I, you know, was jumping up and down about this year for old school RuneScape was Forestry. And I don't know necessarily as if it went through that same process that all these other ones did. I feel like Forestry had an easier time than the previous pieces of content did that we talked about, maybe, in terms of getting community greenlight and community buy-in.
Yeah, but we see how much enchantments it's going to, right? Like, it's Forestry Part 2, and then there's like the whole thing with like the
revamped random events coming.
And the Chargescape being deleted.
Yeah, that's
and
fair.
all that stuff. And honestly, I'm loving Forestry. I'm getting the same event all the time, which makes me less happy about it. In leagues at least. But I think it is a really good way to stick to the original skill. They didn't change any of the base mechanics. They just made it less competitive, which automatically makes it more social. Shout out to the people who show up and decide to chop different trees rather than the trees I'm already chopping. And they just added these distractions, positively distractions throughout to keep the content more engaged.
Yeah, and see, I have mixed feelings about this, because do you call this a woodcutting rework? Because it fixes a number of the main pain points for the woodcutting skill. So I don't necessarily know if it's a full-blown woodcutting rework. I don't know.
Call it a rework, yeah.
Okay, fair. And for me, the biggest thing with it, and the thing that I'd always complained about with woodcutting, was the fact that, you know, the trees were too competitive. And, you know, yeah, the random events are nice. You go to a forestry world. You remember the day after launch? You go to a forestry world and everybody's there sitting in Draenor Village, and it's just event after event after event popping off.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe, and in hindsight, that was probably too many, because it became more about the events than the actual woodcutting, which, of course, the dev blog handled. But overall, I feel like, even, you know, how we were talking about quests and what we saw with quests and what we see with Secrets of the North and Desert Treasure 2 for when we eventually get there, I feel like this is that same approach taken for skilling.
Yeah.
And I might be putting the cart before the horse, and I might say, hey, do this to mining and smithing, because just like you mentioned earlier, I was always complaining to you about the tool belt this year. The second most thing I was complaining to you about was mining and smithing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a reason it got a rework in RS3, and I can definitely see the existing system as not great. For me, even if they got rid of some of the competitiveness,
that would go a long way.
Would go a long way, but being able to chop the same rock for multiple ores would already make a big difference.
Yeah, and obviously that's a side note from the forestry discussion, but it just goes to show that you can still, I guess, rework an old school RuneScape skill without making it look like an RS3 skill, if that makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. Because the forestry rework really could have been RuneScape 3's mining rework applied to old school's woodcutting, and they didn't go that route. So it just shows that there's that independent streak here still, and it's something I think that was absolutely needed, and for me probably is my update of the year.
Good praise.
Yeah, and I'll probably continue woodcutting, but I just have so many other skills to go through at this point in time. Like I just and that's what I found myself doing when Forestry came out, is I forget what quest I was supposed to be working on getting the requirements for. But I was just sitting there woodcutting, and I got 10 or 12 additional woodcutting levels when I should have been doing something else. So
yeah,
but overall,
and I think I've yes.
No, I was just gonna say overall this year's updates, specifically the ones that we didn't talk about and the ones that we talked about, I think, looking at them from the lens of now being an old school player, made sense for the game, and overall I think we're had the necessary buy-in to find a moderately good levels of success with them.
Yeah, and I think Forestry fits in a little bit of a trend that we've seen throughout the updates, right? Like there's a bunch of updates that are either implemented or talked about that make quite substantial changes to existing content, like shooting stars, for example. That was a saga. Let's be honest. The whole shooting star discussion.
Yeah.
And we can think about that whatever we want, but based on that, we are going to see. We have seen how they really want to tackle some of this older content, make it relevant again, make it up to date again with the rest of the world. Like the same with this big poll that we had about current, removing the favor, changing some of the benefits, just streamlining all of that. It's a trend, and I'm so glad that they are giving the space, giving the game like the room to breathe, and to do these things, because it is so easy to accept like 50% of the game is jank and it's going to stay that way in perpetuity.
Yeah, and see that was a big thing with the Corrin changes in particular, is that we got this poll: remove Corrin favor, yes or no. And that's a pretty big change for the way that area works.
Yeah.
And when you think about it and you read the reasoning behind it, you say, yeah, I felt this. Yeah, I felt this. What happens with this? Oh, okay. Yeah, let's just remove the favor at the end of the day, right? Because, we're at the level requirement right now where we can do Kingdom Divided. But we haven't done that yet because I don't know if you have 100% in all houses, but I don't.
I'm missing one faction.
Okay, and I don't want to do that again. I did that on Leagues, and it was hard enough, annoying enough.
Come on, Leagues, you do one quest so you get 100%.
No, yeah, obviously, but for the other ones, I'm making a point here that for the other ones, it was still annoying to get the favor, even with the League's multipliers, and the way that all kind of works together and builds a picture of itself. Granted, people have done that before, but I think that's a primary reason to look at removing.
I don't think it is so bad personally. I think people need to stop whining and just put their back onto it and do it.
Okay.
And I don't think the favor is so bad. I did all of it except for the Shasian one, and that is really not the worst one of all of them.
Yeah, that's fair.
There are
That's
way
fair.
worse grinds in the game, and it gave the area its unique identity, and it tells the story of the different factions. Not so good, not so well anymore as it used to, but it does tell that story. However, at any point in time, as a game designer, you always need to question yourself, this mechanic, does it bring more than that it takes away, right? Like, does it cause more frustration than that it adds in storytelling or joy or emotion? And perhaps it is fair enough to say that the favor system has, outlived its use. And I see the same with shooting stars, right? Like, we're just making it all a little bit more convenient and a little bit easier. Is it a bit too? They made it a bit too good, maybe, but at least it's relevant again.
In the case of shooting stars, it's a symptom of a larger problem with mining.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So,
yes.
And there's multiple levers to push and pull on that one here, but the core of the matter here is that not only are we having new quests added this year, new skilling pieces of content added this year, but the older pieces of content in game are still looked after and still looked at in the realm of balancing for providing balancing updates in old school RuneScape.
Yes. And if I may be completely honest, this is one of the things I'm most excited for about 2024.
Just the new piece, just the adjusting of old content, or
no, the fact that they announced that they're going to do more of it, and maybe even more extensive than we've seen so far. They are looking at making changes to agility. They're looking at making changes to some of the high-level combat items. I'm talking about Project Rebalance, of course.
Yeah, I know we talked about that on the show a number of weeks ago, and I feel like maybe that's like a sleeper piece of content that didn't draw as much attention from the community as it would have normally, because Leagues was just getting started at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at this and Project Rebalance, if you tick off the things that are mentioned in terms of agility, Slayer, and even mining, and like you mentioned, the combat changes, like making it so that you don't always hit a 0, those are big changes that you can make to the game without, and I'll underscore, without fundamentally changing or upsetting the way the game works. And I feel like you have two different ways about making big changes. One, you can either present them to the player base, and you present them in such a way that you lay out your reasoning in a very thoughtful and detailed manner, where you meet and match the perception of your player base, and that's how you push those changes forward. And then the other thing that I think you can do is that you can have pieces of content like Project Rebalance that move around the edges and just adjust and fix things that everybody agrees should be changed, right? Because there's no reason why some of the things that were listed in the Project Rebalance post should have been persisting into 2023 and even 2024, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And with that, I mean, I remember going through the mining changes with you here, and I think my exact words were, you make these changes, we're halfway to the mining rework.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely a win in that regard. And so would you say then that Project Rebalance is your hit list item for 2024 that you're most hoping to see?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% there yet myself, but I'll support you on that.
Yeah. I mean, there's another big piece of content that's looking very promising.
Varlamore?
Varlamore, yes. Essentially another new continent. this time with all the lessons from the previous one integrated with it, I mean, yes, please, right?
Yeah, and at the risk of sounding like somebody who's just got off the RS3 boat and still here at Old School, which I mean, fine, make that assertion if you must. But one of the things that has always been said about RuneScape, and this was even said about RuneScape, back in 2012 before Old School was a thing, add a new continent. We thought they were going to do that when the Fremennik region came out, adding like a new continent like Kandarin or Mistalin or Asgarnia or something to that effect. But there was really only in the Fremennik area Relica and then of course the islands, which of course we can debate about their various level of utility here. But when it comes to Corrin, when it comes to what we're going to see in Varlamore, we have a number of pieces of content that are definitely going to be there, and there's going to be reasons for players to go there. There's going to be new pieces of content, and there's going to be a region to explore. And I think when you sum all of these things up, you really get to a point where, this is probably what the RuneScape community has always wanted to a degree, and now we're actually seeing this executed in a vision.
Yeah, I mean, I think Varlamore is going to release with a few quests. It's going to be really exciting. It's going to be a hunter guild. The bosses look interesting with the gear that fills new niches.
Yeah, that was also a fun discussion when we discussed that hybrid gear. I haven't looked at whether or not those passed in the poll, but
I remember seeing it. I don't remember the outcome anymore.
Okay, fair enough. And you mentioned the Hunter Guild, and I'm going to be so interested to see what they do for that, because Hunter is one of the worst skills in the game. That might be a hot take.
At least we have birdhouses.
Yes, birdhouses are good, but I mean, what's the point of Hunter otherwise, right?
Yeah, I hope that the guild will help a little bit with that. I don't think it's going to fix it entirely.
No, guilds aren't that vehicle for that. And that's another thing, another fun thing with Old School, is all the extra guilds that have been added throughout the game. They're not overpowered or stupidly overpowered. They provide tangible benefits that lean into that skill. So, that's been two of my favorite places to be, the Woodcutting Guild and the Farming Guild, by the way.
Yeah.
What about Old School's?
I look forward to getting access to the Woodcutting Guild in my main.
I was going to ask, what about Old School's first new skill? Sailing. For 2024.
I'm going to be a bit petty about it, but I still don't like it.
Yeah, we need to be 100% clear. I think we both voted for shamanism here.
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt. I even voted against sailing when they pulled that with the green lighting.
I did not.
Poll.
I said put it in.
I don't think they did enough to convince me that it's gonna bring something that feels old schooly. I don't know how it's not going to be dungeoneering or
dungeoneering at sea. Yeah. And
dungeoneering at sea.
And see, here's the interesting thing about it is that I don't know if we discussed this on the show or not, but they did send out a survey, a quite exhaustive survey, to people who voted no on the sailing poll.
Yeah, I filled that in.
Yeah. And I think the number one thing that came up with that was that there was actually an option to say, that it didn't feel real and that it felt like a meme still. And on the initial, response to that, I feel like the thing that the simplest explanation of why somebody might not want sailing is that it felt like a meme and that you just preferred one of the other ones instead.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with sailing. It just means it's something we don't prefer. And it shows, again, like we were talking about in the community section, that there's that two-way streak going on, trying to bring those people on who didn't like it. Do you think you're going to come around to it?
I don't. I gave Necromancy that chance. Yeah, that's pretty damning, isn't it? I don't know. I don't. I'm not gonna set those expectations because I can only be disappointed. But at the same time, I'm gonna let it run its course. And for me, it's going to be the ultimate test for how far the old school team can take things. It's the first time they're actually introducing a skill. The first time they failed with a skill that arguably sounded more interested to me than sailing. Boarding, which was invention done right, in my opinion. But we'll see. Look, I'm not going to be petty enough to say that I'm going to hate it. Period. I don't want it to happen.
Or you're going to quit.
Maybe. No, I'm not going to quit over it. And maybe it turns out to be a skill that I don't really enjoy, but a lot of people do, and it's not going to be terrible
Just
to play.
Like dungeoneering.
So... Yeah, well, I think dungeoneering can be fun in certain contexts.
Maybe sailing will be fun in certain contexts.
And maybe sailing will be fun in certain contexts. I just feel it's weird to add something like that to the overworld, and they have not told me why it is worth all that investment to make the seas traversable for a new skill.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And once again, I feel like we had this thing in the room called leagues that really kind of took away the community discussion about what's happening in 2024, because since November it's been leagues, and we're starting to see people, get their dragon ranks and move back to the main game. Just about 3 weeks left to go, and I'm wondering, what the first major, discussion aspect's going to be in 24 about this, and if it's going to be sailing related or if it's going to be about any of the other pieces of content that we mentioned that are on the way. But I think the thing that doesn't change from all of this is that we have a wide selection of content on the way in 2024. We know what a good chunk of it's going to be. And I'd venture to say that there's at least somebody who is excited about each piece of content that's out there in the community.
I think you're more trying to say that everybody is probably at least excited about one piece of content that's been announced.
Yeah, that's what I said. What did I say?
You said there is every piece of content has at least one person that's excited about it. And I'm like, yes.
Right. Okay.
I am excited about 2 of these 3, so that's 2 of the 3 covered.
Right. Okay. Sometimes I do that where I'll say something and I reverse like the logic of it unintentionally. Oh God. Okay. Yes, but thank you for speaking, Shane, and filling in the gaps.
Yeah.
So the
Project
question:
Rebalance, Varlamore, sailing. That's what's going to come out. But what are you going to be doing?
Yeah, and see that's where it gets really interesting. Is that what Leagues has done for me? Is it's provided me a list of content that I want to play and get to in the main game, and that's exactly what I had hoped it would do. I also had hoped that it would provide me a PVM experience, which I am actually now at the stage where that'll begin. So that means I have about 3 weeks of old school PVM, folks, until this ends. And I have pretty much decided at this point that I'm not gonna fuss about the rest of the points going forward. I'm just gonna play the game and do PVM at this point, and maybe level up a few skills to make things like that easier. But right now, it's just gonna be 100% exploring now that I've got tier 7. With that, to kind of get my feet into the rest of that content, get through the rest of leagues, and hopefully with that, provide a good basis about when I get back to the main game about what I want to do again, what I want to do, and what I want to do, after that as second choices. That's my hope of what I get from the rest of leagues. What about you?
For League specifically, I have set my eyes at Adamant rank. That's another 10k points.
Okay, that's doable.
I just got Mithril rank. Adamant rank sounds doable. I'm not so confident anymore about Rune rank. That's anything beyond that is probably a little bit much. But I think Adamant is reachable. It's another 10k points or so. For me, the nice thing is tier 8 is exactly at the halfway point for me on that journey from where I am right now. That's gonna be it. A little update for people. I did end up going with Tyranwin. I would love to give an explanation as to why on the show, but we're already running over time, I think. So that's gonna wait until the new year. I'm sort of sad that I didn't get to experience exploring that new content as part of the main game. I'm definitely looking forward to getting my hands on more new
there'll
content.
be lore and there'll be quests. There'll be time to...
Exactly. I'm looking forward to getting everything to its, like, bringing everything to its paces. I'm looking forward to... I mean, my goal, I think, for the end of the year is to finish a raid.
You have 8 days.
No, the end of next year.
Oh,
sorry.
Okay.
End of next
I thought we were
year.
talking about leagues.
On my mainscape. No.
Okay.
For mainscape, right? Leagues for me, I don't know. Leagues has just been a joy for me in terms of pacing. It's allowed me to grind little bits, but not too much.
Have you run into any content that you absolutely don't like?
That I don't like?
Yeah.
Not really. No. I've not really hated any of it. Of course, you can sort of choose and pick and avoid it. I think the only quest in my list of quests... No, there's 2 quests, I think, that I can do and haven't done yet, and it's Kingdom of Divided and Sheep Herder.
Ugh.
I might still do Sheep Herder. I think it gives like 4 quest points. Like it's one of those weird ones, which might be good for Tears of Graphics. But no.
Okay.
Not at all.
That's interesting because I have discovered that even with all the League's benefits, I still really dislike Slayer, and I still really dislike Achievement
I don't
Diaries.
mind it so much with all the League's benefits.
Okay.
Like it's not the most fun content, but I don't hate it.
Yeah, and you know, maybe that just comes down to me and my unique ways, the way that I play.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, no. In Mainscape, I hope to get back to it. I hope to get to all of the quests. I love to do the Elf series, of course.
Yes. Yeah.
We'll wall off for that, but I mean, it's only base 70s, right?
I mean, yeah, and I mean, in reality, knowing what we know now and that League's experience kind of, you know, obviously we won't have the same XP rates, but it kind of puts that blueprint forward, which was, I think, a nice thing. And I think if I'm going to, you know, summarize 2024 and what I'd like to get done, Quest Cape and 99 farming. If I can do that, I'll be happy.
I would love to get the Quest Cape. I'd love to get at least a raid done. I think that's going to be my PVM goal.
Yeah.
I would love to do one of them as well. And I think I don't know if I'm gonna get like a 99, but I want to get like base 70, base 80 skills probably, which will.
You don't want to spend a few weeks no lifing winter tote to get 99 farm or 99 fire making untrimmed?
I mean, it depends on what I feel like, right? Like
Sure.
That's really one thing I've learned a lot in all of RuneScape is you really need to lean into what you feel like in a moment.
Exactly. And see, that's the thing that's been my problem with Leagues is that I really, really don't want to do Achievement Diaries. I really, really don't want to do Slayer.
It's a shame you get so many points and benefits out of it.
I know. But we'll save all that. We'll save that discussions for another future Leagues episode because I have some things that I'll say on that might upset you and it might upset the community. But
yeah, I'm sort of glad that Leagues excluded certain regions for me. I'm really looking forward to what they did with the Vampire series, for example.
True, that's true because neither of us did Mauritania.
Neither of us did Mauritania. I'm really looking forward to seeing what they did there. Of course, Desert Treasure 2, Secrets of the North. what they did there, those quest series are really what I'm most excited about, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of how we began last year with questing, right? Like, you remember the murder mystery quest?
Oh yeah, just a better version of the other murder quest, right?
Yeah, and I mean, that was
Murder mystery.
like, that was
Yeah,
that was one of those quests where I had to go talk to somebody. In addition to you, who I did the quest with, I went to Earth, who is a long-term RSBNB community member. I said, I don't know what you're doing right now, or if you want to do any old school, but you definitely have to go and do this quest.
Mm-hmm.
And this was before Garden of Death, so it was my favorite quest until then. But in any case, you're right. We have been going for a little while. Is there anything else with your 2024 old school RuneScape adventure that you want to talk about before we go?
We should maybe talk about the show.
I was going to do that. I was going to do that because I think the writing's on the wall right now. The writing's on the wall. Leagues is coming to a close in a few weeks. We're on episode 8. Initially, we said this would run for 10 episodes. So we have made the decision that we are going to extend the old school RuneScape update past episode 10. And we're going to give it a go for some of the headlining content that comes out in January, February of this year. I don't know if that was immediately clear to people upon hearing this episode or some of the past few episodes. I know it's something that I felt for the past few episodes, and we kind of solidified this in the past week. So, folks, we will be going beyond episode 10, so strap in. We're going to have a look at some of 2024's headline content with you guys, give it the RSPNB update treatment. And I'm looking forward to that.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that, I think there's time for a bit of housekeeping on the holiday schedule here. This episode is coming out Christmas Eve. So, Merry Christmas to everybody. We will be off next week. Kind of think of it as a podcast catch-up week, just as a bit of a gap week in the show, but we'll be back the week after, catching up with what we've been doing on leagues and getting ready for the league's closeout, as I guess you could say. But I don't think I have anything else for this left for this episode.
No, I think that's it. Thanks everyone. For me, the end of the year is always a time to be grateful. So thanks for everyone who has let us indulge yourselves in this little experiment with the show and listen to one or more episodes.
We appreciate it.
Numbers.
We appreciate
it. If you have any feedback, come and join us on Discord. Come put them in the YouTube comments.
We read it all. We read it all.
We
make the effort to reach out if we can, all that fun stuff like that.
Yes.
We don't bite. We don't bite. We like the community interaction. So.
Yeah, no, we don't. Earth does, but
That's true. That's true.
But
in any case, find the show, subscribe, update.show/OS. You can subscribe by clicking one of the links to your favorite podcast listener out there. But with that being said,
it's be Christmas, so it's going to be a great time to tell your friends and your family and your grandma and little sister that should all come and play old school and listen to this show.
Are you doing this when you go home tomorrow?
No.
Okay, I just had to ask. Have a good Christmas, everybody. See you in 2 weeks. Take care. Goodbye.
Bye.